Prithvi Shantirantarikshagam Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we shall continue with our study of the Gita. The last time when we met to discuss the Gita, we saw two important points. In the 6th chapter of the Gita, the importance of moderation, how vital it is in spiritual life to avoid extremes. And by that is meant eating either too little or too much, sleeping too little or too much. In other words, to follow the middle path. And the second thing we saw was that all those spiritual practices that we do, which might comprise prayer, meditation, japa, study, and so on, while these practices themselves might be limited for certain hours of the day, usually some amount of time we spend doing these things in the morning and in the evening, spiritual life itself cannot be limited to these few minutes that we give to it in the morning and evening. Spiritual life is a 24/7 occupation. There are no holidays. So spiritual life is not so much a matter of practice, it's a matter of being. So when someone asks us, like, what do you do for your spiritual life? Oftentimes we might say, well, I do this meditation, or I read this, or I study this, which might sometimes make us feel that spiritual life is a matter of doing things. But that is not how spiritual life is seen in Vedanta. Spiritual life is not about doing. Spiritual life is primarily about being. It's not what I do, but who I am. Now, it's true that a lot of who I am at any given moment is shaped by, influenced by, affected by what I'm doing. So there is a connection between what I do and who I am. But spiritual life means being spirit. And whatever idea we have about the spirit as being distinguished, as being distinct from the body and the mind, whichever way I understand spirit, whichever way I self-identify myself, and it doesn't necessarily have to be always from a philosophical, subjective standpoint, spirit as the Atman, but it can also mean a spiritual identity in relationship with a transcendent being. So, if I make an effort to see myself as a child of God, as a servant of God, that is a spiritual identity as well. Now, to view myself as a child of God, I don't really have to do something. It's not that if I do this, then I'm a child of God, and if I don't do this. It's just a question of how I understand myself. How do I see myself? And it should be as effortless, as clear, as obvious as our present identity. For instance, now, we know that we are human beings. We self identify as human beings. But that doesn't mean we are all the time trying to remind ourselves, I'm a human being, I'm a human being. We don't have to do that. Because my human identity has become so ingrained, has become so much a part of my being, that I don't have to remind myself about it. So, whatever the books might say, right now, my identity is I'm a human being. And along with identifying myself as a human being comes all the related matters. If I say I'm a human being, I'm really saying that I am mortal, that this body, because what makes me a human being is this human body. What makes dog a dog is a dog's body. So this body is an inseparable part of my identity. Now, that's not how we often express ourselves, but when we are saying I'm a human being, I'm saying this body is me. If I say I'm a man or I'm a woman or whatever gender identity we have, I'm really identifying with the body. So, just as we don't have to make any effort to identify ourselves as human beings, when we reach a point in life when we can identify ourselves as spirit, with as effortlessly as I'm identifying myself as a human being now, then I would have reached the pinnacle of my spiritual life. But right now, that's not the case. Yes, we read in the books, we occasionally feel I'm a child of God, or I'm a child of Ramakrishna, I'm a child of Holy Mother. And we feel good when we think that way. But that awareness doesn't remain for a long time. Quickly, because of the habit of thinking of ourselves in human terms, we quickly forget it. And therefore, we need to remind ourselves, no, I'm a child of God. I'm a servant of God. I'm the Atman. So, spiritual life, therefore, is continually trying to remind ourselves of our real identity and to shake off this false identity that has become a part of who we are because of habits, not just of past few years, but maybe of many, many lives. So this is what we saw last time, that moderation in spiritual life and spiritual life as primarily an act of being. Now when Krishna tells this to Arjuna, Arjuna understands that. And Arjuna says, all of this makes sense. But then there is this one major problem. The mind, it's so difficult to control the mind. A part of me understands all of this is very true. And this is what I must be doing. If I do this, I will be what I must be. But the mind just will not cooperate. And so that is the question he then asks Krishna. If you look at verse 33 of chapter 6, this is how the verse goes. Arjuna vacha yoyam yogastvaya proktaha samyena madhusudana etasyaham napashyami chanchalatvat sthitim sthiram chanchalam hi manak krishna pramathi palavadridham tasyaham nigraham manye vayo rivasudushkaram. Arjuna said, this yoga which has been taught by you as characterized by evenness, I do not see the possibility of its lasting endurance owing to the restlessness of the mind. Verily, the mind, O Krishna, is restless, turbulent, strong, and unyielding. I regard it quite as hard to achieve its control as that of the wind. With the wind power and solar power of today, we could say, at least in some ways, we have learned to tame the mind a little bit. Not too much, not fully, not completely. But in some ways, at least, we can use wind power to benefit us. But we know that just as we cannot hold the wind in the hand, we cannot stop it. We can try to protect ourselves from it if it's very cold, but we cannot stop the wind itself. In the same way, we cannot stop this mind which is so powerful. The mind does whatever it does. The mind is not under my control. One friend was telling his buddy about his dog. So he said, my dog is very intelligent. My dog has a mind of its own. So if my dog is there and I tell my dog, come here. If my dog wants to come, he comes. If he doesn't want to come, he doesn't come. In other words, my dog is not under my control. Putting a positive spin on it will be, my dog has a mind of its own. And that's essentially how our mind is. A lot of times when we are meditating, we would want our mind to be focused on our Ishta, the mind to be focused on the mantra that we are repeating. But the mind has a mind of its own. If it wants to do it, it does. If it doesn't want to do it, doesn't. Now that is the problem. And we can completely understand, all of us can understand what Arjuna is trying to say. Because in our lives, we have all encountered this. Not only in our daily practice of japa and meditation, but in many other matters as well. Sometimes if the mind is very stressed out or worried about something, then all the time the mind will be obsessing about that. Then even if I'm watching a television program or if I'm watching a game, but if there is something my mind is worried about, then I won't be able to enjoy that game. I won't be able to enjoy the television program that I'm watching because the mind at that time is dragged to someplace else. So it's not just about meditation. Even our day-to-day lives, when you go to a workplace and if there is some important work that you need to do, but if there are some other problems that your mind is trying to deal with, then you won't be able to put your mind on that work. Or if there are a lot of problems at the workplace and there are a lot of things you need to attend to at home regarding your family, your children, or so on, you won't be able to put your mind there. So we have all, in one form or another, experienced the vagaries of the mind. And so this is the question Arjuna asked Krishna, that all of what you say makes sense to me, but what to do with this mind? You are the only one who can help me solve this dilemma that I have of how to control the mind. And Krishna replies to Arjuna, agreeing with him. Krishna doesn't say, oh, no, what you're saying is not true. He says, absolutely. You are right that the mind is difficult to control. So this is what Krishna says in verse 35. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha asamshayam mahabaho mano durnigraham chalam abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. The Blessed Lord said, without doubt, the mind is restless and difficult to control, but through practice and renunciation, it may be governed. So, two things. Krishna, first of all, agrees with Arjuna. You are right. The mind is restless and the mind is difficult to control, but not impossible. So, there is a difference between something being difficult and something being impossible. So, that's first thing to recognize. That Krishna, while he agrees with Arjuna that it is difficult to control the mind, he does not say that it is impossible. In fact, it is possible. It is possible to control the mind by two practices, two things. And Krishna says that is abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa means practice and vairagya means renunciation or detachment. The first part, abhyasa or practice, is easy to understand. We know in our own lives, from our own experience, that things which appeared very difficult in the beginning become progressively less difficult when we keep on practicing it. Any new skill that we try to learn, any new thing that we try to master, in the beginning it is difficult. For instance, if you want to learn violin and you have never played violin in your life before, and you hold the violin and then you start playing it, the very first sounds that may come may likely be terrible. And if the first time you are playing violin and it's really great, you probably did it in your past birth. We'll come to that. But usually we find that any new thing we start doing, in the beginning, it's not good. We make many mistakes. Now, some people get discouraged and say, this is not for me. I'll never be able to do it, and give up. But what helps is perseverance. First of all, faith in oneself. Yes, I know I can do it. And secondly, I'm not going to give up. So, faith in oneself and perseverance. And to continue with it through patience and practice. So, practice with patience and perseverance. Peace, practice with patience and perseverance. Swami Vivekananda often used to refer to 3 P's. He said purity, patience, and perseverance. And in one of his letters, I think, he mentions these 3 P's, says purity, patience, and perseverance, and above all, love. So there is lot to unpack here. But for the time being, let's just hold on to practice. So, yes, the mind is difficult to control, but if I keep on practicing, then it becomes easy. Now, what does it mean? What does practice really mean? For me, then, I need to figure out which are the times when I acutely feel I want to do something, but the mind won't cooperate with me. And one thing, as I've already said, happens when we are trying to meditate. We want to visualize the object of our meditation in the heart. We want to focus on the mantra, the sound of the mantra. And while we might be able to do it for a few seconds, and then just the mind slips away and the mind starts thinking of something else. And out of habit, we might continue with our practice mechanically. Our rosary might still be moving, but the mind has already gone someplace else. Now, what practice means is that once I become suddenly aware, oh, here I am sitting, trying to meditate, and my mind has started thinking of other things, other images, other thoughts, other sounds. Then, rather than getting very upset about it, what I should do with patience and understanding, just hold that mind and bring it back and say, sit here and focus on the Ishta, focus on the meditation, focus on the mantra. And then it's very likely that it might stay there for a few seconds and then run away again. Once again, with patience and perseverance, you drag it back and say, just do it. We sometimes may not see immediate effect of this, but over time, even just a couple of days or 3 or 4 days, you will notice that the mind is running away, still is running away, but maybe not as often and as easily as it did before. So practice does have a tremendous amount of effect. Many of you parents probably know this, that sometimes when you have little children at home and you want them, let's say, to sit and do their home assignment, and you tell them, okay, sit and finish the work, and then, well, if you are lucky, the children will just obey you and do everything. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes when you have left the room to do some other chore, they might just go and start watching the TV or start doing something else. Now, it's very easy to come back and see that your child is not doing what you wanted them to do and get upset about it or scold them or get frustrated. But rather than that, patiently just hold them. In the olden days, when we were young, they would just hold us by the ear and drag us. I think times have changed. Maybe that may not be the best way to do it now. But just hold the child by the hand gently. Say, sit here and finish your homework. And then again the child might go. And again you patiently say, sit here and do your homework. And now, I think there is going to come a time when the child realizes it's just not going to work. My mom will just not leave me alone. And so it's much better that whatever I'm asked to do, let me just do it, finish the assignment, tell my mom I have finished the work, and then I'm free to do whatever I want. Now, some children will get this quickly. Some children take some time. But our minds are like that. So some minds may learn rather quickly. Some minds may be more reticent. But we have to keep on practicing. Now, the important thing is this. The mind that we employ in meditation is not different from the mind that we employ in doing other tasks in life. So the mind at the workplace that I have, the mind that I have to do my household chores, the mind that I have when I go marketing or when I'm doing other stuff, it's the same mind. So I cannot say that I'm going to focus well while I'm meditating and then let the mind free and do whatever it wants the rest of the time. It doesn't work that way because the mind is the same. So if my mind remains focused at the time of meditation, I must make sure that it remains focused at other times as well. And if my mind remains focused in other times, in other activities, then there is a greater hope, greater chance that it will remain focused in meditation as well. And that is what was meant when we saw earlier that spiritual life is a state of being. It's a matter of training the mind, not only during these few minutes that we meditate, but training the mind, period. So whatever we do, whatever the nature of our activity, we must do it with attention. We must do it with focus. So that's the first thing, practice. And the second, which is related to that, is vairagya, detachment. Because it is detachment that will help me focus my mind to where it needs to focus. Now, all of us have varied interests in life, sure. We are not like a single track mind. So, yes, I may be interested in politics, I may be interested in games, and there are my studies, and then there's the family matters to be taken care of, and so on. So we have all these different directions where we have duties, we have responsibilities, we have interests, and so on. So, what is important is to train the mind that at this time, this is where I want the mind to be. Yes, that doesn't mean other things are not important, but at this time and in this place, this is the most important thing. And if I can train my mind that way, then once that activity is over, then I go to the next activity and then tell my mind, this is the most important thing right now. So, although we speak about detachment, vairagya, we need attachment too. A lot of times in spiritual life, attachment is spoken of as a kind of a problem, and detachment as something that we all should try to acquire. But come to think of it, we need both. In fact, we already have both. We have attachments in life, and there are things we are detached from. There are things which don't concern us, or things that we don't like. We don't want to think of them, and we don't. So there are things we are detached from already. There are things we are attached to already. Now, if I'm attached to things that are good for me, that are healthy, that go to make me stronger, physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, I think that's great. That attachment is wonderful. And similarly, if I'm detached from things that are negative, that are unhealthy, that make me weaker in some way, that's great too. The problem is only when I'm attached to things that are not good for my growth and my evolution, and I'm detached from things that are good for my growth and evolution. That is where the problem comes. And that's why I need discernment. I need viveka. I need a calm, clear mind to be able to have the ability to see any situation, any object, any person, anything, any place, whatever, to just see it and say, this is good for me, this is not good for me. And if it is good for me, attach yourself to it. If you say it's not good for me, detach yourself from it. And we saw, how do we know if something is good for me or not? A simple test that Swami Vivekananda offers to all of us is to ask yourself this simple question: will this thing make me stronger? And if the answer is yes, that's good for me. If this thing will make me weak in some way, then it's not good for me. So this way of thinking almost always helps. But we have to be very honest, very brutally honest with ourselves. Just because we want to do something and then we just convince ourselves, oh, this is good for me because this is going to make me strong, that won't work. So, no self-deception. If I can look at things objectively and clearly and then say, this is good or this is not good, this is healthy, this is unhealthy, and then attach yourself. Start practicing holding on to what is good. Now, as I said, there could be 10 different things that are good. But what is good at one time, at one place, may not be the best thing at another time at a different place. For instance now, say eating healthy food. It's a good thing. So that's something that I should do. But meditation is also a good thing. That is also something I should do. Now, if it is my time for meditation, then at that time when I'm trying to meditate, trying to thinking of food, no matter how nourishing a food it is not a good thing. Because then my mind is going to get distracted. So at that time, and the time of meditation, then my mind should tell me, I should tell my mind that at this moment, nothing in life is more important than meditation. Nothing. My very existence depends on this. If I can convince myself of that, then concentrating my mind will become much easier. Then afterwards, when you are eating, give your whole mind to that food. That time don't think of anything else. Don't simultaneously be watching a television while you are eating. Most people do. You will see, at least a part of the time when you are eating, you just eat. Don't talk, don't discuss, don't listen to anything. Just put your whole mind on the food. You will see that the food will taste better. I'm assuming that it's cooked well. It will taste better. So wherever we concentrate our mind, we acquire much deeper, greater knowledge of that activity. So therefore, practice and detachment, both are very important. And if I can hold on to these two practices, then the mind can come under control. That is what Krishna tells Arjuna. Now Arjuna's next question is, now I have faith in your words, there is Shraddha, but what if no matter how hard I try to control the mind, I still don't succeed? And none of us has infinite time at hand. One day we are going to die. We are going to grow old and we are going to die. What then? I haven't achieved my goal. My mind is still restless. It has faith, but the mind hasn't come under control. What then happens? And this is what Krishna says. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, verse 40. Parthanaive hanamutra vinashastasya vidyate nahi kalyanakrit kaschit durgatim tata gacchati. The Blessed Lord said, verily, there is destruction for him neither here nor hereafter, for the doer of good never comes to grief. This phrase, nahi kalyanakrit kaschit durgatim tata gacchati, the doer of good never comes to grief. Durgati never attains to durgati, never attains to ruin, is never ruined. This was a very popular or a very favorite phrase that Swami Vivekananda often alludes to in many of his letters written to his own brother disciples and to his disciples. He would, especially when he spent years here in the West and he was writing most of the communication, no emails in those days, no phone calls, and so he had to write long letters to keep the community united, to inspire them when they felt discouraged. And he kept on referring to this verse, saying, Nahi kalyana krit kaschit durgatim tata gacchati. A doer of good, kalyana krit, one who does good things, durgatim, will never attains, is never ruined, never comes to any grief. What is not often recognized is the tremendous strength the tremendous power that is embedded in leading a good life, a life of dharma, a life of honesty, a life of truthfulness, a life holding on to certain basic values and principles. Even if a person doesn't believe in God, even if a person is not religious, but if that person is uncompromisingly moral, the person is truthful, just this practice of truthfulness and honesty brings such tremendous amount of strength and power that that person is able to face any difficulty, any challenge in life. Now, that doesn't mean that people who are truthful and honest will not have problems. Of course they will. Sometimes we see that such people have more problems. And that's what sometimes makes people think, what's the point of being too good, of being unselfish, when people who are selfish, people who are terrible, they seem to be having an easy life, or they seem to be moving ahead. While I'm holding on to these principles, I'm lagging behind. Now that shows not enough faith in the power of goodness. In order for success in life, both individual life and even national life, the first great requirement is conviction in the power of goodness, conviction in the power of dharma. If majority of people in the country, well, we have an election coming up, so this is something that we all have to figure out. If the majority feel that being good and honest and truthful, being unselfish, being kind, being loving, it doesn't work nowadays. We just, every person for themselves. We just have to gung-ho, we just have to do, just might is right. If majority of the people start thinking that way, that means we have lost faith in the power of goodness. In fact, we probably have greater faith in the power of power without recognizing that power itself is empty if it is not built on the foundation of honesty, truthfulness. And so, for success in our own personal lives or success in collective life, a life of dharma, a life of honesty is very important. And so this is what Krishna says, that yes, it's possible that a person, in spite of great effort, great struggle, may not succeed in a short time to control the mind. But such a person, even when such a person dies without having controlled the mind fully, that effort is never lost. And that's what the succeeding verses, Krishna then says, that such a person, the Upanishad says, yatha karma yatha shrutam. It means that our future is determined by what we do in the present. And even if I have failed in controlling the mind, but if I have made a sincere effort to be honest, to be truthful, to hold on to some basic values and principles, I made an effort to be kind, to be loving, to be unselfish. If I have made that effort is never lost. So then I go, and then as we read in the Gita and then in other texts as well, that after this life, wherever I am reborn again, I continue with my unfinished business. So whatever effort I have made, whatever little progress I have made, I may not have succeeded fully, but even let's say I have succeeded just 10%. So, and then I die. Then when I am reborn, I don't have to start from zero. The meter is not set to zero again. I start from that 10% control that I have already acquired in my previous birth. So I already have a head start. And let's say in that next birth, I move and I still am not able to control the mind. Now we might say, why is it so difficult to control the mind? The reason for that is not very difficult to understand, because the habits that the mind has acquired is not simply a matter of months and years. Yes, sure, some of the habits we have acquired a few months ago, some of the habits we have acquired a few years ago. But even those habits which we have acquired a few months or years ago, we know how difficult it is to change those habits. Now, what about the habits that we have acquired through lives, through hundreds of lives? So through hundreds and thousands of our past lives, we have been seeing ourselves as just these body-mind creatures. And that's a very strong habit. For tens and thousands of lives, maybe we have not made much effort to control this mind. The mind has had a free rein, so to speak. Now we are trying to control it. So there is this huge history every one of us has. And so it's understandable why we may not succeed immediately. But whatever success we make, even if it is 10%, then in the next birth, I start with that 10% head start. And maybe I go to 50% and I die. Then I'm reborn again, and then I start with 50% ahead. This is what explains the differences we find among human beings. We might see that some people seem extraordinarily talented in some respects. Some people are able to have a better understanding than others. And they have not succeeded in attributing all of this only to just a nurture, only to saying, oh, just because somebody was given a better training or somebody had better opportunities. Sure, that's a part of the equation. But it never explains everything fully. The only way to understand the differences is that we don't start with a clean slate. When we are born, we already have a long history behind us. So our starting points are different. And that is what is meant by saying, Nahi kalyana krit kaschit durgatim tata gacchati. Whatever gains we made will never be lost. Now, just to get this clear, the gain in training of the mind, that is not lost. But the data that the mind acquires will be lost. It's a little bit like, let's say, I memorize the entire Gita. There are people who have done this. So I memorize the entire Gita. And then at some point, person who has memorized the Gita dies. Now that doesn't mean when that person is reborn again, they will know all the Gita at once, just because they have memorized it. No, because whatever I memorize, that's stored in my brain. And the brain is a part of this body. And then when the body dies, this returns to dust. So that data will be lost. Now, but if I have tried to live my life according to the Gita, the training that I have given my mind to practice the teachings of the Gita, that training that the mind has received, that training will not be lost. If I have learned to live according to my values and principles, and when I am reborn, that mind will be better equipped to continue living according to the values and principles because it has already started practicing for that earlier. So that is what Krishna says, that a person who has tried to lead a good life, an honest life, even if that person dies before realizing God, before attaining enlightenment, that person then will be reborn in a situation where it is easy to continue one's own life's journey. And this is also another question that often comes up, is how is it determined where we are born in the next birth? Which family are we born into? Who will be our new set of parents? Do we get to decide? After I die, will I have a form to be filled up saying, give your choices, first choice, second choice, third choice, which country would you like to be born in, and so on. I don't know whether such a form is given. Really, I mean, who knows? What the texts say is that the general principle in life is to follow the path of least resistance. And so if I have cultivated a certain tendencies in my mind, if my mind is trained in such a way, and if there is this aspiration, let's say I really want to lead a spiritual life. I want to devote myself to a higher power. I want to hold on to certain values. And I try to live like that. I may not have done it perfectly, but I try to do that, and eventually I die. But because that has been the aspiration of my heart, that is what I have trained myself to do, that is what I want to do, the chances are that I'll be reborn in an environment which will make it easier for me to continue on the trajectory of my life as I had aspired for, as I had trained myself for in the previous birth. On the other hand, if I'm allowed to say a person is a human being, and that person lives without any principles, without any values, lead a very selfish life, a life of a brute, if you like, a life that is completely given to sensuality, a life that is without any higher principles, a life which elevates the demands of the body above everything else, then if such a person dies, because of the way the mind in that person has trained itself to think, it will be born in an environment where it is easier for it to continue that kind of life. That is why sometimes we see some human beings and we are shocked at their behavior. We think, how can a human being even do these things? Sometimes we look at the actions of people and say, this is behaving like animals. We are shocked. We just think that this is not what human beings do. This is below the human dignity to be behaving that way. So that's how we judge, and we say that's animal behavior. Now, people who indulge in that kind of behavior, it seems reasonable to think that that mind in those bodies will then, after death, be reborn and take another body where it is easier to manifest the tendencies that the mind has trained itself in. And therefore, since it is much easier to express one's animal tendencies in an animal body than in a human body, maybe they might be born in some other species. We don't know. I mean, again, this is just pure guesswork. But depending on the insights we find from the Gita, what is said here is that we are reborn in an environment, in a situation which best helps us continue our journey. And that journey is something that we have determined for ourselves. If my present life and the practices and the habits are such that I have determined that I want to go on a spiritual journey, then after death, I will be put in a situation, in an environment, in a family, where it's easier for me to continue that journey. But if I have some other plans right now, then after I die, then there'll be a different environment which will make it easier for me to follow that trajectory. So that's what I meant by following the path of least resistance. So eventually, whether or not we succeed fully in reaching the spiritual goal in this life, gradually, if we continue struggling without giving up, 10% now, 20% later, 30% later, eventually we will attain to that goal. But a true spiritual seeker will not say, oh, in this life, let me just go 10% and then take it in installments. Not a very good idea, because again, as I said, we have no idea. There is all this uncertainty about what happens after death. Where will I go? We can make some what seem to be reasonable guesses about where we might go and what we might do, but it's still a big mystery. And so therefore it makes much better sense to, rather than aim for having only a little bit of progress in this life and then have a long-term plan of attaining to God in some future birth, what Ramakrishna, Holy Mother and Swamiji encouraged was that we say, no, I'm going to attain enlightenment in this birth itself. I'm going to use my best efforts, I'm going to pray, I'm going to seek God's grace and have that deep faith that through God's grace I will attain to God in this life itself. Now, as a backup plan, if you don't by any chance, not to worry, whatever efforts you have done will not be lost. You can continue from where you stopped, but don't plan on doing it that way. Plan on realizing God right now, right here. So we will stop here at this point. And if you have any questions and comments, we will discuss them after 5 minutes. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. Let's look at the questions. These days, multitasking has become the norm in our secular life. Seems like it's a necessity. Is this an obstacle in our meditation practice? If so, what do we do about it? Yes, I think it's an obstacle. Multitasking sometimes gives us the impression that we are simultaneously doing many tasks at the same time. It's not really accurate to think that way, because at any given moment, I can do only one thing. So when we feel that we are doing two things simultaneously, for instance, let's say I'm doing my dishes and I'm listening to music at the same time. And well, that's a very simple way of multitasking. I'm listening to music and I'm doing my dishes. What is actually happening is that my mind at one moment, for one moment, it's at the washing process. And the next moment, it goes to listening to the music. Then here, then here. So it's oscillating very quickly. So quickly that I think that I'm doing two things simultaneously. Physically, yes, I'm still continuing because of habit. I know what needs to be done. But the mind itself is going back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes we think that, oh, there are these 10 things I'm doing at the same time. But we are never really doing everything at the same time. At any given moment, we are doing just one thing. Multitasking is a problem because if that's what I'm doing all the time throughout the day, then it will be very difficult for me to do any concentrated activity. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should never listen to music while we are doing something else. But what I do recommend is that at least on a few occasions in the course of the day, I must allow my mind to be doing just one thing. So the mind should have some practice in doing just one activity. Because if the mind is all the time going boom, 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 boom in different directions, then that habit of the mind will persist even during meditation. And that's why I might be saying my mantra, and the next moment I'm thinking, oh, I've got to do this afterwards, then come back to the mantra, go back, come back, go back. Then the quality of the meditation will never improve that way. So at least a part of the time, it's helpful. So therefore, even if you are in the habit of having discussions while having a meal or listening to music, it might be helpful to say, once we begin a meal, the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes, no one is going to speak a word. If you're sitting with your family and eating your meal, say, let us just focus on the food and not talk. And maybe after 10 minutes, then you can discuss whatever you want. There's a lot to discuss in this week, coming week. But if we can do that, that's a form of training. Also, speaking about eating, at least a few minutes of eating in silence, concentrating on the food. As I said before, we'll enjoy that food more, but it is also a form of recognition to the person who has cooked that food. Well, if it's just a takeout, you got it from a restaurant, then you probably don't even know who cooked that food. But if it is something that you have cooked yourself, or someone in your family has cooked that food, then I think when everyone sits together for a meal, at least for a few minutes, to eat with concentrating on the food and enjoying that food is a form of respecting the person who has taken the time and the trouble and the effort to cook that food. Because sometimes if you're so animatedly talking while eating, or busy watching the television or listening to podcast while eating, you may not even know. Your plate is full and you have been watching some interesting program and you eat it and then your plate is empty. You have no idea what you have eaten. Of course, you know what you have eaten, but you have not relished it at all. You have no idea what it tasted. That's, I think, a form of disrespect to the person who cooked that food. So I think this would be a good practice. So not to end multitasking totally, but at least have some times in the course of a day we say, okay, this time I'm just going to do one thing. I think that would be a good training for oneself. Next question. Should our goal be to control the mind or to simply let go of the mind? Or are these the same thing? It doesn't look like the same thing. I think controlling the mind would be when we find the mind trying to do things or trying to go in the direction we do not want it to go. That is when we have to control it. And letting go of the mind would be when the mind is doing what we want it to do. So for instance, when I'm trying to meditate and my mind of its own is out of love, out of devotion, out of faith, is thinking of the divine, thinking of the spirit, thinking of God, I don't see any need to control the mind then. Just let go of the mind. Let it be fully immersed in the divine. So, allow the mind to go if the mind is going where it should go. Control the mind if that is not where you want the mind to go. Next question. How should we interpret verse 41 if we take an example of Sri Valmiki, who turned from a hunter to most prolific writer of Ramayana? The verse 41 says, Prapya punyakritam lokan ushitva shashvati samaha shuchinam shrimatam gehe yoga bhrashto abhichayate. Having attained to the worlds of the righteous and dwelling there for everlasting years, one fallen from yoga reincarnates in the home of the pure and the prosperous. So the story of Valmiki is that he was a dacoit or a robber, and whose life was changed and transformed, and he became a saint. So the question was, why was he not born in some righteous family if eventually the trajectory of his life was to become saintly and enlightened? And the answer is, I don't know. The Gita says in one place, Gahana karmano gatihi. Inscrutable are the ways of karma. So, we just know the broad principles. And there are always going to be exceptions. There are always going to be cases which cannot be put into neat categories. So this is not like mathematics. If this happens, then you will be born in this family, and then you will be born in this situation. No, it doesn't work that way. So when there are rules, then there'll be exceptions to the rules. And so that's essentially what may have happened in the case of Valmiki. Could you say a little bit about the relationship between realization and liberation? How realization leads to liberation? Well, there are two kinds of liberations, at least two kinds mentioned in the Upanishads. One is called Jivan Mukti, the other is called Videha Mukti. Now, Jivan Mukti means being liberated while living, and Videha Mukti means being liberated after death. In order to realize God, in order to become enlightened, one doesn't have to die. So enlightenment is not necessarily a post-mortem experience. We can become enlightened right now, at this very moment. And being enlightened simply means to know who I am, that I am in reality the infinite being, pure, perfect, immortal, and free. And I can get that knowledge right now. And once I get that knowledge, I'm not just going to disappear like a vapor and say, whoa, where is this person gone? It doesn't work that way. I will still be in this body. I'll be still, for all practical purposes, will be moving about, talking, and being just who I am. But internally, everything has changed. So I am then become a living free, a Jivan Mukta. But eventually, Even a Jivan Mukta is living in the body, and that body will one day going to die. So after death of the body of the Jivan Mukta, then that is called Videha Mukti. That is, this person then is never reborn because all the seeds of karma have been completely burnt. So that is one way, that realization while living and liberation in the sense that there is no coming back into this relative existence, Videha Mukti. In Vedanta, they also speak about one other kind of mukti, and that is called Krama Mukti. Krama Mukti means gradual liberation. One thing to be kept in mind is that oftentimes when we speak about rebirth and reincarnation, I think invariably many of us think about coming back here on this planet Earth. So a person dies and then this person comes here. That may be a very limited way to think about reincarnation, because God's creation is vast. This planet Earth is not the only plane of existence. It doesn't even necessarily have to be in some other galaxy or in this material plane. The matter that we are able to perceive or think of, or the matter that any of the scientific instruments are able to measure, it could be a completely different level of material plane. So being reborn doesn't necessarily mean being reborn here on this earth. In fact, when we say that people die and go to heaven, now just think about it just logistically. If a person goes to heaven, how does this person appear in heaven? It's not like they just kind of drop down from the heavenly skies somewhere. Also, what age would that person be? If a 90-year-old person dies and that 90-year-old person goes to heaven, it's not that that 90-year-old person is going to drop as a 90-year-old person in heaven. So this person is going to be born in heaven to some parents in heaven. So there is going to be a reincarnation. This person is going to be reborn, but the next birth would be in heaven. So first thing to remember, therefore, is not to think about rebirth only as a rebirth here. It could be rebirth in any different plane. That's why in the books they speak about different planes of existence. We know there's Brahmaloka, but there is also Gandharva Loka, and then of course there is Surya Loka, Chandra Loka, Pitru Loka, Deva Loka. There is no end to it. In other words, it's infinite. Infinite possibilities exist. That is the first thing. Second thing is, think about something that we were speaking about earlier today. And that is, if a person is a sincere spiritual seeker who is struggling to realize God, made substantial progress in their lives, but somehow did not attain that complete enlightenment before death. So technically, this person will have to be reborn. But because this person has led such a good, honest, truthful life, a life filled with punya, this person then is born into some highest heaven, maybe Brahmaloka. Now, we have seen in our lives also that there are ups and downs in our spiritual lives. That there are times, there are phases in our life when our spiritual life seems to be just going great. There's great practice and we seem to be making good progress. But then things change, circumstances change, and perhaps there is a phase in our life when the practice goes down. We are no longer able to practice with as much enthusiasm, as much focus as we were doing. And then we feel like, oh, I was making good progress, and now I think I have gone some steps back. And then again, maybe things change again, things improve, and we start moving ahead again. So, the course of our lives is often with these ups and downs. And sometimes that can happen to good people who die and because of their goodness go to heaven. Now, heaven as a place is generally conceived of as a place where there is plenty of everything. There is a lot of enjoyment, plenty of food, plenty of entertainment. Now, if we are put in that situation, maybe our mind does get distracted. So someone who was spending a lot of time meditating and studying the scriptures dies without realizing God, goes to heaven, and suddenly find lots of delicious food, the food that I love, and great music. And if I am a baseball fan, then my favorite team playing every day. Well, you get the point. Then it might be difficult for me then to continue my meditation practice with as much focus when there are so many of my favorite distractions there. And so my practice might go down a little bit until I am, of course, nobody stays in heaven permanently. And so again, I come back and then maybe the circumstances change again. And once again, my spiritual life resumes. But think about another case, a similar case, a person who has been leading a spiritual life very earnestly and then dies and then goes to heaven. And again, plenty of great food, plenty of entertainment, plenty of wonderful things. But this person is so focused on their spiritual life, so focused on their goal to realize God. Even in heaven, this person says, I don't want all those things. I'm just going to find some quiet spot and continue my japa, continue my meditation. And so this person then tries to find a quiet spot in heaven and then sits and continues practicing. Now, let's say only a little bit of work was remaining. This person had kind of almost gone 90% close to the enlightenment. Only 10% were remaining. And if this person remains focused, that remaining 10% can be done in heaven itself, under some quiet tree, on some flowing river nearby. And then this person can attain enlightenment in heaven and then become liberated. This person then doesn't have to be reborn anywhere else. That's why it's called a gradual liberation, that you don't have to come back to this plane of existence where we are. You go someplace else, but you don't get distracted. Then you continue and resume the practice and then become free from there itself. So that's a third way a liberation is possible. So there are really many different ways. In bhakti scriptures, they mention many kinds of muktis. Sarupya mukti, sayujya mukti, and so on. In other words, one gets to live very close to the Lord in heaven. One acquires the same features as the Lord. Now, all these are very dualistic conceptions of freedom. And in the Upanishadic understanding of freedom is, they say all these are nice things, but they say freedom really means experience of oneness. And so as long as there are two, and even I may be in the highest heaven, I may be very close to the Lord loves me and I love the Lord, and that's wonderful. But still, it's a little short of that complete liberation. A liberation would mean, therefore, no two. That would be an Upanishadic way of understanding liberation and distinguishing it from realization that can occur while living or can occur at any other stage of life. Next, Swamiji, does yoga teach that enlightenment is inevitable for a spiritual seeker, even if it takes eon? Absolutely. We are all moving towards freedom. Sooner or later, every one of us will reach that liberation. Every one of us will reach enlightenment. But the sooner we do it, the better it is. Why should we go there kicking and screaming and suffering so much in the process? So it's possible for us to speed up the process. It's possible for us to go there quickly. It's possible for us to go there in a straight line, which will be the shortest route possible, than to meander our way through various ways. And then distractions are like that. Even people who are distracted will eventually come back on the main route. But it's like taking a wrong exit and then finding your way to the highway again, taking a wrong exit, and then of course it's going to take a longer time. Next, aren't karma and karmaphala relevant only at the level of the body and mind? Also birth and rebirth? Absolutely. Where there is body and mind, there karma exists. Therefore, even in sushupti, in deep sleep, there is really no karma because the body, we don't have awareness of our body and mind. But until we are liberated, until we become enlightened, we will be associated with the body and mind. And therefore, karma will be with us until enlightenment. Next, what to do when the tendency is to escape and find cover in God? Sometimes I don't ask if something will make me strong. I ask if it will bring even a false peace. Well, finding shelter in a false peace is a form of self-deception. People who want to escape can never find a cover in God. They are only fooling themselves. To truly find shelter in the divine being, one has to face the challenge headlong. So people who are cowards, people who run away, people who try to escape, are not trying to face the challenge. They can delude themselves into thinking, oh, God is protecting me, but that's like the example Sri Ramakrishna gives of a fisherman's net. When a fisherman casts the net into the sea, so he says that there are some fish who never get caught. There are some fish who are caught in the net but are able to struggle and free themselves out of it. But there are some fish who actually have the net, are in the net, bite the net, but kind of bury themselves deep down near the bottom of the lake and think, oh, I'm very safe. I'm completely safe. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, when the fisherman pulls the net, they will know they are caught. So we will be deluding ourselves into thinking, oh, I'm just safe in God. Because if that seeking of safety in God has come as a form of escapism, running away from the challenges, then that's a false sense of security. The word that is used for spiritual seekers in the Upanishad is dhira, often translated as the brave one, the courageous one. So if I cannot face the challenges in life, I will not be able to face the challenges in spiritual life. The difficulties, the struggles in spiritual life are more intense, more profound, more subtle than even the challenges we have in our daily life. So spiritual life is not for cowards. It's for the brave. It's for the courageous. It sometimes appears that people who lived a dishonest, instinctive life are rewarded with more power and success in their next life. I don't know how it will appear. What happens in the next life, how will anyone know? Is that because they are in the company of the like-minded people that are more in number than the righteous and the untruthful, a sign of Kali Yuga? I don't think so. I can understand a kind of question that can come to our mind, that dishonest and people who live a false life may seem to be rewarded in this life, may seem to find success in this life, and that can be confusing. But we don't know after they die where will they go. And at least if we look at the basic law of karma, if someone has led an dishonest life, then they have to face the consequences. And the consequences of living without any honesty and truthfulness, the consequence of living without dharma are not going to be good consequences. They are going to be very painful. There's going to be a lot of suffering. And one more point is this, that when we see people who are dishonest, apparently successful, as I said, that can be little disorienting, can be very confusing. There are two things to keep in mind. The first thing is, what does success even mean? Because a lot of people who might seem successful externally may probably have no peace of mind internally. Maybe they are not able to sleep at night. Maybe they cannot eat and digest the food they eat. So success, we just have to ask ourselves, what is my idea of success? A person who may not be a millionaire, may have just enough to go by, but who can digest the food they eat, who feels contented and happy and sleeps well and loves everyone around, that person I think is more successful than someone who could be a billionaire. So is success in the money that we earn? Is success how much recognition I have? How much famous a person becomes? So we just have to ask ourselves, what is my idea of success? Next, regarding the need for the emphasis of one's spiritual practices to realize God in this life, could this be the reason other religions of the world tried not to include rebirth in their philosophy? I do not know. All that I can say is that belief in rebirth is not an absolute must. It is just a framework to understand life around us. And it's possible to think of this entire creation in a different framework in which maybe rebirth is not necessary. And if someone finds that way of thinking logical, if something that satisfies their head and heart, they are welcome to it. Some people might find this. So it's important that people who believe in rebirth don't become dogmatic about it. Reincarnation is not a dogma. It's not something that you have to believe in. But if it helps understanding life around in a better way, you're welcome to it. And so, in fact, there is this one instance in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. Once someone asked Sri Ramakrishna, is there rebirth? And Sri Ramakrishna's answer was, he said, well, Krishna says in the Gita there is rebirth. Now, Gita we know, there are references to rebirth. In fact, we saw a few verses just today. So Ramakrishna's answer was, well, it is mentioned in the Gita. And the questioner then told Ramakrishna, said, don't refer to the Gita. You tell me whether there is rebirth or not. And Sri Ramakrishna says, if you don't believe the words of the Gita, you think you will believe my words? If the Gita says something and you're not convinced, how do I know that you will be convinced if I say anything about it? The interesting thing in that is, he just doesn't say whether there is rebirth or no rebirth. And I think that's very interesting. And come to think of it, Even from a Vedantic perspective, I think that's a very wise thing, to not become definitive about whether there is rebirth or not. Because in a relative sense, yes, of course, it just makes sense that there is rebirth. But in an absolute sense, there is no birth itself. I mean, in order for rebirth to occur, there has to be birth. But the whole point of Vedanta is the soul is eternal. The Atman is eternal. The Atman is birthless and deathless. So that which was never born even once, how can it be reborn? And that's the trick. So you cannot say there is no rebirth. You cannot say there is rebirth. All that you can say is that's one way of thinking. And if that way of thinking helps you understand life better, helps you understand, make sense of the life in a better way, that's great. That's all that we can say. Okay. Next. Sometimes faced with choices, knowingly we seem to make the wrong decision, like Duryodhana in Mahabharata. How can we prevent this from happening? And in order for us to prevent becoming like Duryodhana, we will have to acquire clarity of mind. Because when the mind is clouded, when the mind is confused, we do not know, we are not able to distinguish right from wrong. We are able to, because we cannot see things clearly, then we end up making a wrong choice. We end up making a choice that brings us more pain than joy. And so in order to acquire that clarity by which we are able to see things as they are, the mind must become pure. And making the mind pure means, again, what we said before, living according to dharma. Trying to be truthful, trying to be honest, trying to be unselfish, lead a life of self-restraint, self-discipline, having a spiritual goal, doing your daily practice of prayer, meditation, and so on. All these practices done with patience, perseverance, and purity, the 3 P's I mentioned earlier, doing this as best we can, even if we are not able to do it perfectly, but we do it sincerely to the best of our ability. If we can do that, we will acquire a reasonable amount of clarity in life. And with that clear mindedness, the choices we will make will be right choices. It will not then be like Duryodhana in the Mahabharata. So we come to end to the questions for this class. So we will meet again next Sunday and resume the study of the Gita. So next Sunday we will take a look at some of the important ideas and teachings that occur in chapter 7 of the Gita. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.